Galatians chapter 1, I continue in verse number 2. And all the brethren which are with me unto the churches of Galatia. Now, I pointed out over the past several broadcasts about the matter of the churches, that this is a circular letter that was written, not to the church at Galatia, because there is no city called Galatia. Galatia, rather, is a region. What today would be present-day Turkey would have been the region of Galatia. And then the churches, the matter of the churches here is a plural statement. I've identified 5 or 6 churches in the region of Galatia. Iconium, Pergamos are 2 of those churches that were in this region. Having dealt with that matter of the churches, that gives me an opportunity to spend a few days dealing with the matter of the church, the doctrine of the church. I think that this is an important matter that I should spend a few days dealing with because of the amount of confusion. In our day, we are met with the phenomena that is called the emergent church. And they have self-identified, a body of individuals self-identified them as the emerging church or the emergent church. And then there are some in this emergent movement that make a further line of demarcation between the emerging church, I-N-G, and the emergent church, E-N-T. Now, in my research that I have done, I'm not able to make a discernible distinction between the emerging church and the emergent church. I'm unable to identify this is one and that is the other. But because of this matter of the church, and this is just not dealt with, there are many preachers, and I'm not angry now, I'm not throwing stones, I'm not at war with anybody but the devil. But there are some men that are so occupied with entertaining their congregations and trying to hold their attention that they never deal at any time with any doctrinal matter or doctrinal area. And because of that, some of these things that need to be known are simply not dealt with. In one pulpit, the pastor preaches 52 sermons on 52 consecutive Sunday mornings on you must be born again, and makes an evangelistic pitch in the morning hour. And then in other places, the ministers are second-rate comedians and second-rate entertainers. And then yet in another pulpit, the preacher preaches against sin, quote-unquote, 52 weeks a year. None of them ever bother to get to any of the major doctrines that are dealt with in the Bible. And I remember as a child, my grandfather at the tabernacle would expound his way through the book of Romans. And on Sunday mornings, my grandfather usually brought his doctrinal messages on Sunday morning and his more evangelistic messages on Sunday night, which is exactly opposite of the way preachers are trained. You preach evangelism, you send out your buses, you bring in lost people, and you preach evangelism 52 Sunday mornings, and you baptize those that come forward. You baptize them on a profession of faith before they get on the bus and go back home. And then if you're going to deal with a series or a theme, expound your way through a book, you do that on Sunday night. My grandfather always was the opposite. And I remember as a boy, my grandfather on Sunday morning would say, open your Bible to the book of Romans. And in my young childish mind, I said, boy, it's going to be a long one today. I could enjoy my grandfather preaching about Elijah and Elisha and the people of Israel crossing the Red Sea, the contest between Pharaoh and Moses, and I could comprehend that in my young mind. And when my grandfather got to this area of doctrine and theology, in my young 8, 10, 12-year-old mind, there wasn't anything entertaining about it. But I rejoice that even though as a child, I may not have taken all of that in, and I may have dreaded when he said, I'm preaching this morning in Ephesians. And under my breath, I said, oh no, it's going to be a long sermon today. But I really took in a whole lot more than I realized. And that even as a child, established and anchored me in Bible truth. Bible truth that other pastors that didn't bother to expound the Scriptures or didn't bother to deal with doctrinal matters, their congregation, and consequently the children of their congregations, would not have had that advantage. In dealing with the matter of the church, the reason the matter of the church ought to be dealt with, and I'm going to deal with it over the next several days, and perhaps for the balance all of this week, is because the doctrine of the church and the teaching on the matter of the church is just as plain and just as positive in the Bible as any other doctrine. There are many people that know much about the doctrine of harmatology, the doctrine of sin, and they know a good bit about the doctrine of soteriology, the matter of salvation, because they preach primarily on sin and salvation. But we get to the area of ecclesiology, and that is the matter of the church, and then the matter of eschatology. And I have been a bit alarmed at some of the gross eschatological errors that I'm observing in some pulpits. There are some men claiming to be fundamentalists that are now preaching mid-tribulationalism, and they're calling it the mid-trib pre-wrath rapture. Well, it's just the old mid-tribulationalism to me. There's not anything under the sun. The doctrine of the church is just as real and evident in the Bible as any other doctrine that I find. And yet, the conception among many men, even many professing Christians in what we would regard as Bible-believing churches, a positive definition of the church is indefinite at best and vague at worst. If we were to ask the average church member, define for me, explain to me what the church is, some of them would scratch their heads and say, well, I know what the church is in my mind, but I don't know if I can explain it to you. From vagueness to outright alarm, if you got into some landmark circles or brighter circles, you would really go from pillar to post trying to understand a definition of what the church is. Now, the problem with this is the way that we have used this term church. And I'm back to my premise when I began my message on what is this new phenomenon now called the emerging church or the emergent church, which are these ecumenical religious organizations that spring just from out of nothing and spring to having 4,000, 5,000, 6,000 people in attendance, multiple campuses. We have a number of those in the upstate of South Carolina, and I would say that those churches altogether probably account for 20,000 people, 25,000 people that attend a church in the upstate of South Carolina. 20 or 25,000 of those would be affiliated with one of these mega churches. So they say, well, we're the emerging church, and their definition and their usage of church would be different than Paul's usage of church in the Pauline epistles. Whenever Paul talks about the church of God in the book of Ephesians, and yet there is a denominational affiliation called the Church of God. Then there's a branch off of that called the Worldwide Church of God, and yet their usage of the phrase Church of God would be entirely different than Paul's usage of it in the context. Paul refers to the Church of Christ, and yet there's a denominational movement called the Church of Christ. And they would say, well, you see, Paul identified our church, he named our church, but when I look at Paul's theology in the context where he uses Church of Christ, I look at the theology of the denomination, the Church of Christ, I discover that they are not the same. Most of the time, in the broadest secular usage of church, the term is used to distinguish between people that are religious and people that are non-religious. So someone says that 10% of the people in America are, or 20% of the people in America attend church. And they're trying to distinguish between those that are religious and those that are not. Now my time is gone. The Lord willing, I will continue with this on the program tomorrow.
Correspondence may be sent to the Bright Spot Hour, Post Office Box 4, Greenville, South Carolina 29602.